Ndala, Ndala, Ndala. Welcome, welcome, welcome back. Today we are going to talk about another principle of Maat. As we've seen, each and every one of the principles of Maat are all interconnected, interrelated. This means that while they stand alone and have meaning on their own, their truth and embodiment only comes along when you actually use them all. This means that not only are you called to sometimes focus on one of the principles, but at the same time you always revisit the others. As you improve on dealing better with one, with embodying better one of those principles, sometimes challenges related to that principle intertwined with another one may come up, may show up. And today when we talk about compassion and communicating with compassion, which is a principle that comes right on time. And so speaking with compassion is grounded in two different levels. Of course, you have the form, how you speak with compassion, meaning the tone that you take, the words that you choose and that you use and that you express, the way you express yourself as you speak to somebody, with the intent of compassion behind it. So you have to be conscious and aware and specific and intentional about the word that you choose, who you choose to speak to, and how you speak to them. So this may question many things within you, especially those of you who are often said that to tell it like it is, anyhow, anyone, to give it raw, etc. and etc. It doesn't mean you have to be untrue to your own self, but it means that you have to take a moment to assess whether the way you're speaking, the intention behind your communication is truly compassionate. So when you are called to look into and dive more into compassionate communication, it requires that you examine yourself. You examine the way you communicate with others, the way you interact with others. You examine the vocabulary that you use, the word that you choose. You examine your tone. You examine the intention that you have when you are speaking with compassion or when you are wanting to speak with compassion, and more generally when you are speaking and communicating with others. So it's very important that you grasp this invitation of Maat, which is another way to continue to work on yourself. Not to assess what's wrong with others, but to look at how you can improve yourself, how you can better yourself, and how you can truly and fully embody this principle of communicating with compassion. So that first step is really in terms of the form, looking at, maybe you need to expand your vocabulary, expand your ways of expression, maybe by reading more, maybe by spending more time with people that you find compassionate. If you feel like you're missing compassion within yourself, try to see who around you has compassion. Try to seek out people who have compassion or who express compassion or that you perceive to be very compassionate. And so that's an exercise in itself. And of course, the more you surrender yourself with people who are compassionate to begin with, and the easier it will be for you to practice as you maybe more and more influenced by those that you admire and that you spend time with, you will be more easily inclined to actually absorb their way of speaking, absorb the form, the vocabulary that they use as you spend more and more time with them. So that could be also a way for you to expand your circles of friends, maybe expand your circles of acquaintances, maybe expand your horizons. Find a channel of somebody who speaks with compassion, somebody who's not preaching but is speaking with compassion, who intends for the listener to be touched with truth that is being said with a lot of compassion. When you look at the word compassion, you find in there passion. Passion is emotion. Passion is motivation. That means, and it's matters that comes from the heart. So compassion really says the truth of the heart. What you're saying and communicating is truthful. You're doing it truthfully. One cannot be speaking compassionately while telling lies to another. If you want to speak to someone and you have something to say to them that may be hard, that may be difficult for them to hear, then communicate that information with compassion. Information to be communicated with compassion, you have to ground it in truth. Not your truth, not their truth, but the truth, which is another conversation to be had. So the first step, as we've mentioned, is truly working on your form. And this may a lot do with call you to view also how your emotion, maybe you're somebody who uses particular vocabulary, but when you are angry or sad or super happy, you start using words that may be harsh, that may be aggressive, that may be out of your character. And so when you are called to speak with compassion, you have to examine yourself and say, are you speaking from a place of anger and hurt and aggressiveness? You have to be able to look at that, to assess yourself and to redirect, or even sometimes just to be quiet and to take your time. Speaking with compassion is not something that we blurt out to anyone who wants to hear, or that we just explode with whatever we need to say. Speaking compassion requires that we take time to think about what we want to say and why we want to say it. That's where the compassion comes in. Certain things need to be said because of the reason behind it, the intention is behind it. And these bring us to the second aspect of it, the second step, the content of the communication that has to be compassionate. Like we always say, there is a time and a place for everything. Not all truth need to be said. So when you're speaking of compassion, usually the information that needs to be communicated may be harsh, may be difficult for that person to hear. And that's why you need compassion when sharing the information, when communicating the information. The compassion component is actually what is going to make it a little bit easier on you to disclose that information. So in that sense, the content of the communication has to be something that's true, has to be something that's useful. There's no point of speaking compassionately and telling somebody something difficult they may need to hear if it's not useful to them. So you have to assess that for yourself. Is what I need to communicate with compassion useful for this person? Is it needed? Is it truthful? Is it divinely inspired at this moment for me to be feeling compelled to share the information with this person? And it's not that all of the answers to this question has to be yes, but going through this around this few questions may help you assess if you really need to express yourself and to share with this person. One of the ways also to ask is whether this person asks for your input or your advice or your perspective. It's oftentimes a lot easier when you've been requested, when somebody is asking you a question or wants your advice or perspective. It's easier for them to receive the information because they solicited that perspective from you. It's a lot harder when it's something that's not solicited and that you are imposing on somebody else or even wanting to share with them. Now, when we talk about the content, sometimes what we need to express with compassion may be very harsh. It may be hard for that person to hear sometimes because it's something that is not easy, that is something that's be difficult or negative. So for example, if somebody needs to change because there is a series of events or things about them that is always getting them into trouble, and you are able to see what it is within their behavior or within their personality that is causing this difficult situation, and you want to express them to them, you should be expressing that to them. The reason that the necessity of expressing that to them is also a form of compassion. As you see, many people who walk around and say, it is not my business. This person can behave however they want to behave. And this is even more important when the person we're talking about is a child. Because some people will go in their childhood uncorrected. They will do many things that are negative, many things that are wrong, many things that are not serving them. And because they don't know any better and they've never been corrected, they've never been helped, they've never been shown the correct way to do certain things. So this is where you may tell them that this is not the right way to behave, depending on the situation that it is. And even though they may take it very aggressively or they may take it negatively, you expressing that to them is also a form of compassion. And compassion is not so much about the person realizing that this information is very important, but it's also is much important to the person communicating with compassion, because this is something that you are called, or called is actually the best way to put it, called to provide. So and that's why you have to do it truthfully, and that's why even if that's not what this person wants to hear, you need to communicate that information, but you communicate it with compassion. Now, you have to distinguish the fact that you are trying to choose proper words and trying to use proper words to wait for the right time, etc., to find an appropriate setting. I'm not saying there's going to be a perfect time. There's never a perfect time to communicate with compassion. However, you still have to take into consideration the place and time. As I say, there's a place and time for everything. You're not going to start telling somebody some deep truth while they're at their job stressed out. You have to, take those different things, circumstances under consideration. So one of the key point here to remember, compassion is not an easy thing. Compassion is something that comes from within yourself. You will know that you are being compassionate if you go through yourself with that question. Whatever information you need to share or communicate, which requires compassion, you need to go through the few questions that we've assessed earlier. Some of them could be why you need to communicate that information. Is it useful to the person? Is it truthful? Is it going to be helpful? Going through that little bit of assessment, also assessing your own self in terms of your emotion. Where are you with your own emotion pertaining to that person, pertaining to the information, or pertaining to other circumstances around you, just to make sure that those emotions are not interfering with the way you want to express that with compassion. Yelling at somebody, unless they're very far away and it's a matter of life and death, it's not deemed usually to be very compassionate, especially if they're sitting right next to you and they can hear you properly with your regular tone of voice. So you have to assess all of those things just to make sure that when you are acting within the principle of Maat. You are not being facetious, you're not trying to mislead, you're not trying to lie. And your intention in that communication is to do it with compassion, to do it to help that person. Sometimes helping that person also means unburdening you, because it may be that the information you need to communicate is something that you've been carrying for a while, maybe looking for that person and finally finding them. But so long as you make that effort, that behind your words, your actions, you seek and you infuse them with the compassion that you have within your heart, it will make a difference. It may not be that the other person sees it that way. A lot of time you may have the best intention of the world and the person doesn't receive it that way. But striving for communication with compassion is what Maat will be always inviting you, always requiring you to do. And beloved, as we've mentioned, working with Maat or working on yourself to embody this principle of Maat, we're not doing this for other people. We're not doing this for this big reward. We're doing the inner work to be able to clean, cleanse, and purify our inner world. We want our intention and strive for our inner world to be a reflection of the principle of Maat. So the reward is always inward. The reward is always in the action that we pose. By doing it, that's a reward. You are being rewarded by doing it. So as we visit and continue to visit the principles of Maat, I encourage you, beloved, never to feel discouraged. It's not a path that you are alone, where you are alone. Those principles are given so that you always remember that as you're working on yourself, as you're working on all of these principles, the divine is always present within you, with you, accompanying you all the step of the way. So it is a matter of you always reminding yourself and remembering that this is a divine calling. This is why it may take you time also sometimes to listen to it and to go for it. But you're never alone in the road that you are on. And embodying some of this principle is what is actually getting you closer to the divine in a lot of ways for people who are on the path of Maat. For those of you who are just listening, who have issues understanding, of course, you can place your questions below. And I hope that as you work on your compassionate side, as you strive and you look around you, as people are arguing, people may be fighting, be and strive to be the person who is compassionate. Strive to be the person who says no to division, to decisiveness, who is able to look at other people with the compassion that they deserve, who is able to not be manipulated into discriminating or hurting other people that have really not done anything to you. Rise above all of that, and sometimes the compassion that you have to exalt may not be towards somebody that you expect. It may even be towards somebody in your own family, in your own circle of friends, who just crosses the line, who rejects somebody in front of you that has done nothing to them. Compassion is also about that. It's also about you checking your friends and telling them that what they're doing is wrong. Telling them in the most compassionate way that you can. But that's also part of it. It's not just, most people when they think about having to communicate with compassion, they're thinking about when they have to tell somebody else the truth, how somebody else is doing things wrong, how they need to change, etc., etc., etc. But compassion is as much about the other person as it is about you. And it can also be about the people around you that are creating the chaos, that are creating the division, that are creating the disharmony among fellow human beings, or the disharmony among the human race, or the disharmony on this planet, on this plane, on this dimension. So speaking with compassion may require you to intervene, to stop being silent, to stop turning your head on the other side, but to speak up and to offer both the person who's doing the wrong and the person being victimized compassion. And as you do so, be certain, beloved, that as we all express and act with more compassion and communicate more compassionately, the vibration on this planet, the vibration on this earth, is going to rise with us. And as we change our behavior, our way of thinking, and our way of acting, so does the world around us. So thank you so much. Please do leave your comments, your suggestion. I hope that if you are on this path, I'm so happy you choose to come here so we can share it with you. Please share your challenges or the tips that you will want others to know as you work on this principle.